Hello, AP Environmental Science. Welcome back. This unit is on global change. It's a good time to remind yourselves, that Earth is a global system and that the actions of one nation can affect the climate conditions thousands of miles away. We're going to start off with an example using the most cutest animals of all, polar bears. Polar bears are one of the best-known species of the Arctic. With a geographic distribution surrounding just the North Pole area, the polar bear plays an important role in that whole frozen ecosystem. These bears, they're ferocious predators, and they specialize in eating several species of seals, as you can see in the photo here. These seals, they live under these large expanses of ocean ice, and they come up for air wherever there's holes in the ice. And the bears, they roam around the ice in search of these holes, and they pounce on the seals when they come to the surface. In many cases, these bears, they will consume only seal blubber, which is a concentrated source of energy critical to an organism living in such a cold environment, right? The portion of the seal carcass that remains is a significant food source for other animals, including the Arctic fox, one that comes to mind. The polar bear is also important to the indigenous people of that whole frozen area. They've long depended on its food, on the actual bear for food. They eat its meat and their fur for clothing. And over the last few decades, temperatures in the Arctic have risen much faster than in other parts of the world. Warmer air and ocean water have caused the polar ice caps to melt, raising a concern among scientists and the general public because both the popular appeal of the polar bear and its importance to the ecosystem and to native people. Scientists have been taking satellite photos of the polar ice caps for 30 years or more, and in 1978, these photos revealed that the ice cap extended from Russia and Norway to Greenland and even Canada, and then on into Alaska. And over these years, the ice cap has shrunk and it's retreated away from land. During each year, a natural cycle of shrinking and expanding that occurs in the polar ice cap, but it becomes smaller during the summer and larger during winter. Because of the rise in Arctic temperatures, the amount of summer shrinking of the ice has actually increased. So to measure the extent of this shrinkage, scientists compare yearly measurements taken at the end of each summer, and they compare that to the average amount of ice that's present, and they've been doing that since 1979 to 2000. Within that time, scientists found that there was about 45% less ice each year from 2006 to 2012. That's a total area about twice the size of the state of Texas. But not only is the ice shrinking, it's actually getting thicker, making it more vulnerable to melting in the future. In fact, in 2013, the area of the polar ice cap at the end of the summer was even a bit larger, but still smaller than the past decades. In fact, in the 10 years with the smallest areas of summer ice have all occurred within the last 10 years. So as the polar ice cap melts, the polar bears have been losing habitat. And during the summer, when the ice cap becomes unusually small and the ice retreats far away from land, polar bears, they can no longer reach that ice hunting ground for their seals. Today, the sea ice melts 3 weeks earlier than it did 30 years ago. And because of the shorter time, they're able to hunt a whole lot less, and they're able to not hunt as many seals. Male polar bears near that Hudson Bay in Canada, they currently weigh 67 kilograms. That's 150 pounds. And that is actually less than they weighed 30 years ago. So the population of those polar bears living in the western side of the Hudson Bay has declined about 10% in the last 10 years. So the status of the polar bears population, it's not easily assessed, given their remote location and how they move around. Of the 19 distinct populations that actually live in the Arctic, researchers at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature found that 1 is increasing, 3 are stable, and 8 of those populations are decreasing. The remaining 7 populations, they lack sufficient long-term data to determine their status. So when considering all populations combined, scientists are predicting a 30% decline in the number of polar bears in the next 25 to 40-ish years. A sharp decline or extinction of polar bears would have a wide range of effects on the ecosystem and even on indigenous people that live in the area. Seal populations could increase, and that is usually due to the diminish of their predator. While other species like the Arctic fox, they're going to decline because they really would have fewer seal carcasses to feed off of. In 2014, researchers working along the Hudson Bay found that bears had begun to compensate for the reduced feeding on seals by basically changing their diets in late summer. They started feeding more on snow geese eggs, in addition to that, also caribou, and even some plants, oddly enough. And in addition, these changes, they will also cause the indigenous people to also be affected, because if the polar bear declines, not only in terms of food and clothing will they lose out on, because that's what the polar bear provides, but also from the perspective of a cultural, social identity. As an ecosystem changes with the decline of the polar bear, people of the Arctic may find their livelihoods completely altered, and even their lives. In 2008, the United States classified polar bears as a threatened species because of the decline in their ice habitat. And if the current conditions they persist, the species will continue to decline. In 2009, the 5 nations with polar bears populations, Canada, Greenland, Norway, Russia, and the United States, they agreed that the polar bear should be classified as threatened throughout its entire global range. So while acknowledging that the population and hunting contributed to the bear's bleak future, the nations also agreed that the effect of global warming on the ice caps poses a great threat to the polar bears. And this means that the solution to the problem is not simply in the hands of those few nations that contain polar bear habitats, but it's in the hands of everyone on the planet, and because we all contribute to global warming. In 2013, the United States and Russia went a step farther by announcing an agreement to push for a CITES, a cities rule, to basically ban the international trade in all products from polar bears, including furs and even teeth. And while the plight of the polar bears has drawn a lot of attention to the effects of global warming, it is one of many indicators that our world is rapidly changing because of human activity. In fact, there's a new movie that has just come out. You can see its advertisement here. It's called Chasing Ice. One of the facts that we haven't really discussed and that is not in your textbook is that it affects their breeding. The global climate change has caused the Arctic sea ice to melt earlier in the year, and this not only affected the food availability and their habitat, but also how they breed and their breeding patterns. The melting of the polar ice cap is just one example of many changes that take place on Earth. We're about to examine how humans have altered the world's climate and explore the underlying causes of these climate changes. We will also investigate and observe these consequences of the strategies, because humans and other species, we need to consider our future consequences. We also need to tie together many of the themes that we have developed throughout the entire semester and see the interconnectedness of the systems on Earth. Environmental indicators that enable us to measure and evaluate environmental status of Earth, they are all interactions of environmental science and have all contributed to environmental policy.